So I love working with webhooks, but one of the challenges you'll encounter when working with a remote webhook system is getting those webhooks down to your local machine so you can work with them and interrogate them there. In today's video, we're going to look at 2 ways that you can overcome that challenge and get remote webhooks delivered to your local machine. So yes, today we are going to be getting or attempting to get webhooks down, delivered, whatever you want to say, to our local host. And we're going to look at 2 ways in which you can do that. There are more, of course, but we're going to look at 2 ways today. Now, before we go on and look at the solution, let's just do a quick review of webhooks. I'm assuming if you're here, you know what they are, but let's just do this quickly so we're all on the same page. So, as it says there, yes, webhooks are a way to introduce event-driven patterns into your integrations in an open, relatively simple way. So, let's look at the alternative approach you might want to take here. So, let's say you have an e-commerce application and you are wanting to understand the status of an order or a number of orders, for example, when it's shipped. So, in an API-driven approach, you would potentially have to poll that endpoint for status changes, and that can be rather inefficient. So webhooks kind of turn that on its head. They introduce this event-driven model where the provider, the e-commerce platform in this case, will send you, the consumer, an event to an endpoint of your choosing. So that is one of the implications of using webhooks. You have to set up an endpoint for the source system to send events to, which is fine. So let's look at another example. We're actually going to be using GitHub today. They have a webhooks system. So let's say you want to understand when somebody raises a ticket, an issue, a bug ticket against a particular repository, and you want that to be sent to Slack. Slack, for those of you that don't know, is just a group messaging platform basically. And so GitHub, if you register a webhook with GitHub, they will send an issue raised event to Slack, and that will appear in some form in Slack, and the team that's monitoring that Slack channel will go and do something. Okay, so it's a very simple example, all good. So what is our problem statement today? Well, as a developer, and this has happened to me many times, I actually want to receive those webhook events. In the last example, that would be GitHub. I want to see them down at my local machine on localhost because I want to write some solution that takes that event and does something with it. And for me personally, it's part of my developer workflow. The best or the easiest way or the most efficient way for me to do that is to actually get that event down to my local machine. The problem with this is that, generally speaking, localhost endpoints are not resolvable by the remote system, in this case, GitHub. Okay, you can't put localhost as your endpoint into GitHub, as we'll see in a second. So GitHub, same scenario. I want to get GitHub webhooks down to my localhost. If I attempt to put in some kind of localhost address to the GitHub registration page, into the webhook registration page in GitHub, it's not going to know what to do with it. And that's today's problem statement. So we want to basically solve that problem. And we're going to solve it in one of 2 ways. Now, there are many other ways you could probably do this. We're going to look at 2 today. First one is to use a platform called Ngrok, which is really an ingress app. I'll talk a bit about that in the next slide. Another method is to use Azure, specifically Azure Functions and Azure Service Bus. They're going to do pretty much the same thing. So the first option is Ngrok. What is that? That basically provides a publicly discoverable endpoint. So rather than a local host address, you're going to get some kind of address that can be routed to on the internet. And that can be either dynamic or fixed. Okay. And Ngrok then routes that traffic, any webhook traffic that hits that endpoint, down to a local agent that you have to install on your machine. And the local agent then forwards that traffic to your localhost endpoint. So here's the example. Here's GitHub. You set up webhooks. You got a localhost. You install the Ngrok agent on localhost. There's then the Ngrok web platform or cloud platform, or edge as they refer to it, where the actual endpoint exists, the discoverable endpoint. That's what you configure in GitHub, and GitHub will then trigger any webhook traffic to that edge endpoint, and then Ngrok will then tunnel it down to the local agent, and the agent then takes over. So we're going to set that up today. There's no real coding involved at all, it's just config and installation. The next approach is using Azure Functions, and in my mind this is possibly a little more enterprisey in its approach, and you could possibly adapt this pattern to an actual enterprise solution. Not that I'm saying Ngrok isn't fit for enterprise stuff, but in my experience, Ngrok is used more for kind of developer type scenarios, not so much production enterprise stuff. This is obviously a developer approach, but it could be adapted is what I'm saying. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up an Azure function. It has a discoverable endpoint, so we'll send webhook traffic to that. Anytime webhooks hit it, we will then place the traffic onto the service bus, and then we will write a little service bus subscriber down on our local host that will listen for messages on that service bus. And so we're really then getting the events down to localhost. So it works in the following way. GitHub, as you've seen before, localhost, we'll write a little .NET agent, we'll have Azure, an Azure function, a HTTP trigger function in this case, service bus, and then we will register our Azure function endpoint address with GitHub. They will trigger traffic to that endpoint, and then it will drop that onto the service bus, and then the agent will receive those events. All right, so quite an interesting one, I think, today. A couple of different approaches to doing the same thing. I think that's enough slideware. Let's get coding. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is scaffold up a little endpoint that we would ideally like to get traffic to, webhook traffic to, and it's going to sit on our local machine. Now, we could just have this pre-prepared, but I think it's good to go through it and set it up step by step just to paint the full picture. Anyway, if you want to skip ahead, you can. There's the chapter headings down in the description below, but if you want to follow along all the way, here we go. And of course, the code is also available on GitHub. So I'm just going to change into my D drive, into my development folder, into season 7 and into episode 01. And there shouldn't, try that again, there shouldn't be anything in there. It's empty. Cool. So before we get going, I'm just going to check that I have the latest version of the .NET framework installed. So that's .NET -- version. Indeed I do. And I recommend that's the version you use as well for this video. And then we're just going to scaffold up our application, our little endpoint application. So .NET, new, it's the web API template, and we're going to call it local webhook endpoint. Enter. That will get scaffolded for us. Just check the folders there. Indeed it is, and we'll just change into that folder. And then we're going to do all our coding in VSCode. No surprises there. So code space period to open up the project in that folder. It's opened on my other screen, so I'll just pull that across. And for this first part, where we're setting up a little endpoint, and then we're going to use Ngrok, there's not too much we're doing with VSCode other than, actually not a lot at all. When we come on to doing the Azure stuff, there's some really nice features of VSCode where we can actually deploy stuff to Azure from it, but we're probably getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. Let me just make that a bit bigger for you so you can see that. And if you come into the program CS file, this is just the boilerplate code. It's just a very simple endpoint, get endpoint. If you hit this route here, it will just give you some randomized weather. We're going to take all of this out pretty much, apart from a few lines of code. Just before we do that though, I'm just going to configure the profiles in our properties folder. So come into launch settings JSON, and what I'm doing here is taking out some of these profiles because what I want is this profile by default, okay? And I want my endpoint to start on both HTTPS and HTTP. If you don't do what I'm about to do, you'll just get by default a HTTP endpoint, which I don't like. I want to have HTTPS running by default. So delete that. Just be careful when you're doing this because you don't want to take out certain brackets and commas and stuff. So just be really careful where you're deleting stuff. VS Code's again pretty good. It'll tell you where you've gone wrong, and also color codes the brackets, which is a really nice feature they've sort of recently put in. And I'm then going to take out these IIS settings as well. So this file should be really rather simple now. It should just have this stuff in it. Save that off, close that down, and then we're going to do a bit of butchering of our program CS file. So leave in this first line, but we're going to take out lines 3 through to 6. Leave in line 5. We are going to take out lines 12 to 7. Fantastic. And then we're going to take out lines 11 down to 29. and that will leave us with app run, and then finally we'll take out this record that we don't need either. So that leaves us basically with 4 lines of code. Just save that off for the moment, and then we're going to just inject or add in our HTTP post endpoint. So after HTTPS redirection, come down to app, or type in app, and then it's map post. We add in a route, so /, I'm just going to call this webhooks. We will receive all our webhooks. And then I'm going to inject in here a HTTP context. Okay, and we'll call it context. And the reason I'm doing that is that what we're going to do with this endpoint is when we receive a hit, we're just going to print out the headers to the console. Okay, it's pretty simple, but we need the context to do that. And that's it. That's really all we're doing with this endpoint. It's really not going to exist for any other reason. Okay, so let's change the color of our text. You don't need to do this, of course. So it's console foreground color equals console color green, not gray. You can make it any color you like. I'm just going to go with green. If I can actually type the word green, that would be really, really good. There we go. All right, fantastic. And then we'll do a console write line just to write out that we've got a hit. It's winter here in Australia. It's really cold in my office at the moment, so that's why my fingers are not working very well. That's my excuse anyway. Hit. Okay, cool. And then, as I said, we're going to get the headers. So we'll create a variable to hold our headers, and we'll make that equal to our context. And into our headers, no, into our request, excuse me, and into our headers collection. There we go. Now, just be careful here that you are actually bringing in HTTP context and not something like HTTP content. It's very easy to get those mixed up if you're not paying attention, which I've done as I prepared this video. So just make sure it's context and not content. I think content would come first, and that might be why you get that as a default. So just be careful there if you're getting a bit confused. And it's an easy one to miss as well. Anyway, we're going to loop round our headers. So each variable called header in our headers collection, we're just going to print it out to screen. So console, write line, and we're going to use string interpolation, so $sign before our double quotes, and we're going to print out the header key. Make sure the K is capitalized. Again, that's caught me out as well. And the header value. Okay, excellent. And then finally, well, not finally, we've got 2 more things to do. We're just going to reset the color. Not that we're writing anything else out, but just to show you how you do that, console reset color, and that puts it back to the default, whatever that is, white or slightly off gray. And then we'll just return a HTTP response. We're just going to return OK. Okay, so return results. And I'll just say OK. I think that's looking good. So save that off, and then we're going to run that up. So control backtick to open the integrated terminal, and we'll do a .NET. Let's do a .NET build first. Although when you run it, you actually get a build, but I don't know why. I like to do a build first. It's just habit. Excellent. I think I like seeing that build succeeded come up, and I can revel in my magnificence of having 0 warnings and 0 errors. I think that's feeding my ego. So then do a .NET run, and again, you can see it's doing a build there as well. And that will run it up. And we've got it running on our 2 endpoints. Now I'm getting a warning here saying that the certificate is not trusted. Okay, that's interesting. So what you can do if you get something like that, you just need to run a command. So I'm going to stop this. I'll do Control-C, and I'm going to just type .NET. Yeah, it's actually remembered it when I've done it before. So it's .NET dev-search https-trust. And that's just creating a local HTTPS certificate. And you actually get this pop up here. So I'm just going to say yes to that. Okay, so actually quite good that that happened, because usually I've already done that and you won't get that error. So if you've got that error or warning, it's not an error, useful to do it. And also, if you don't do that, if you try and hit the HTTPS endpoint, you can actually get some issues. So let's try that again. We shouldn't get any warnings this time. We don't. I hate warnings, so that's cool. No warnings, and we've got 2 endpoints there. So all I want to do now is test it And you can use any tool that you like. I'm going to use a tool called Insomnia. But if you want to use something like Postman or you want to use curl or something like that, that's fine, you can do that. So in Insomnia, you set up a collection, and then I'm just going to add HTTP request to that, make it post, because again, all webhooks, pretty much all the ones I've seen anyway out there, are always post requests. And I'm going to hit the HTTP yes endpoint, so I'm going to copy this, copy, paste it in here, and then put the route in, which is webhooks. Okay, if you remember, that was what we specified our route as. So if we then send this, we should get some stuff printed out to console. We get a 200 response as well, which is good. And you can see we've printed out our headers. Excellent. So that's our little endpoint setup. Next, what we're going to do is we'll take a quick look at GitHub and see where we can configure webhooks in GitHub and see if we could actually attempt to put in a localhost endpoint into that. Of course we can't, but let's just try it anyway before we move on to looking at Ngrok. So yeah, let's take a look at GitHub. Now what I've got, as I move on to my screen here, is a repository. It can be any repository. This is one that I just use as the preparation repository for this project. So it's not the one that you'll be using if you're wanting to download the code. This is just a private one I have while I put the code together. Into GitHub, into a repository of your choosing, into settings, and then down to webhooks. And I don't have any as yet, but you can add a webhook here. All right, and this is where you create your webhook. So let's just attempt to configure localhost, and you'll know what's going to happen. You can see what's going to happen. You can feel what's going to happen. But let's just do it anyway. Just want to show you. Another thing I like about GitHub is the way they explain it. The error that they give is actually really nice. It kind of encapsulates exactly what the issue is. Really nicely. So if we attempt to do that, don't need a secret or anything like that. That looks incorrect. Let's do that. Looks better. And yeah, that's fine. Let's just add the webhook. You can see here, a bit small. Let me make that a bit bigger. Localhost is not supported because it isn't reachable over the public internet. Okay, so that is effectively, in a nutshell, why we have an issue here, and the whole reason for this video. Okay, so let's move that off to the side, and what we're going to look at now is setting up Ngrok to tunnel webhook requests down to our local endpoint. So let's go on and do that. So let me just show you the Ngrok homepage, ngrok.com. So if you've not done so already, then you'll need to sign up. I did this a while ago, and I just have a free account, and as part of that free account, I was able to claim a persistent static domain, which is really useful. And I mentioned that in the slide where when you start up Ngrok, it will give you this public URL that you can send traffic to. Now, by default, it will be a dynamic URL. And so every time you start Ngrok, it will be a different URL. Okay, it's kind of got like a GUID in the address. Now, that's okay, but if you're testing something over and over and you're stopping and starting Ngrok, that's a real pain. So having a static URL is really, really useful. So I did have one, I do have one of those, and I did get that via the free sign up when I signed up a long time ago. Now I'm not sure, I'm not signed up to this for a while. I'm not sure if you do the same thing now, whether you can claim your free static endpoint or whether you have to pay for it now, I'm not sure. But if you can claim static endpoint, use that, much easier. Now, I'm not actually going to use my static endpoint in this video because I don't want to expose it to the internet. So I am going to use the default dynamic offering, and you'll see what that looks like. Anyway, so follow the sign up steps. It's pretty easy. Once you've signed up, you will log in. It kind of detects what OS you're running in, and it will give you installation instructions for the OS that you're running on. The other thing you have to do, and I'm not going to show it because again, it's kind of security related aspect. It asks you to register a key or a token. And what does it say here? Move it off to the side here. Yeah, you've got to basically update your configuration file. It gives you a command that you need to run, and it basically just ties all the authentication together. Fantastic. And then there's a whole host of information on there. But we're going to go through most of it here step by step. So I already have Ngrok installed. So if I come back over to command prompt, if I clear that down, and if I just type Ngrok just to check that it's actually installed, you can see it's attempting to do something else, but we'll just do that. And yeah, it's finding, Ngrok and giving me some help there. To start Ngrok on public endpoint, and to point it to your local endpoint, this is all you have to do. So it's Ngrok. It's already got it here, HTTP, and then you type in the full address of your localhost endpoint. And I think that's the right one for this video. Localhost 7156. No, it's not. Okay, here we go. 7156. So Ngrok, HTTP, and then HTTPS and the full localhost endpoint. And that will start it up, okay? And you can see here, the forwarding URL is this one here, okay? Ngrok free app. And this, it's not a GUID, but this kind of unique number, it will be different every time you stop and restart. So just to prove a point, do Control-C, we'll do that again. It's different, okay? So it's this endpoint that we need to configure in GitHub. So we'll copy that out. We'll bring GitHub back onto the screen where we were attempting to register our webhook before, and we'll put that in up to here. Now you still need, of course, the / to your route, okay? So we've got the Ngrok endpoint in here, / webhooks, okay? We'll enable SSL verification. Which events would you like to trigger? I'm just going to say everything, okay? You probably don't want, but let's just do it anyway, and we'll add it. Now that should, from memory, trigger a webhook down to, and in fact it has done, down to Ngrok, because it will actually send a webhook as part of the registration process, just to kind of prove it out. Okay, so there you can see we've actually received something via Ngrok, and then our application is still running, and we've got another hit, and you can see here all the headers that have been printed out. Okay, so that's it. That's how simple it is to use Ngrok to tunnel traffic, webhook traffic from GitHub down to localhost endpoint. So it's a great option. The one thing I haven't mentioned is that when you're actually downloading on Windows, Windows Defender will kick in and say this application, it's not that it's not trusted, but it can have some undesired behaviors. And basically what they're saying is you're exposing effectively your local host out onto the internet, so be careful. And by default, it kind of doesn't quite block it, allows you to continue, but it does, yeah, it actually does block it by default. Didn't get that experience, I don't think, when I did it on a Mac, but maybe it does do that, can't quite remember. Now, if you're running this on your own local PC, that's fine, you take that risk. If you are thinking about using this within a work environment, you might not even be able to install it if the desktop is locked down. If you do have the permissions to install what you like, do check with your security team to make sure that they are happy for you to install it, because you don't want to get in trouble either. Okay, so it does have some security dimensions to it, but if you be careful, it should be fine. And you can, as we can see here, you can see any traffic that's hitting it. Okay, so we could create an issue. In fact, let's do that. Let's create an issue for this repository. Let me just bring that onto the screen here, to a new issue. And we'll say something like, there is a bug. My spelling, nothing else. Okay, so we'll submit a new issue. And theoretically that should trigger an event. Indeed it does, it's so quick, it's already done it, and you can see there. So my point being, you can actually see traffic that's coming in and hitting your exposed endpoint. All right, cool. So that's enough of Ngrok. Hopefully you found that useful. Next, we'll move on to doing the Azure Webhook. The Azure Function and Service Bus solution. So yeah, let's do that next. So we'll come on now to getting our webhooks delivered to localhost using our Azure Service Bus and an Azure Function. And the first thing we'll do is set up the Service Bus, and I'll do that from within the Azure portal. Now, as with any cloud service, you will need to be cautious about your consumption and the fact that that could potentially lead to charges. So what we're doing today and the way we're going to test and everything should be of minimal cost, but again, that is your own responsibility to make sure that you don't leave the function running and have, you know, lots of traffic going through it. Anyway, that's the disclaimer over. Let's get started and create our service bus. So click on create resource, we just type service bus. That should come up. And it's this one here, Microsoft Azure Service Bus. And service buses are used a lot in microservices architecture, distributed architecture, to orchestrate messaging between different endpoints. We're really just using it as a delivery pipeline today for our webhook messages, but it could form part of a larger overall system. So yeah, Service Bus, click create. Select your subscription, select your resource group, and then give it a namespace. So I'm just going to call it Webhook Delivery, something that doesn't already exist. That looks okay. Pick your location. I'm in Australia Southeast. Pricing tier, we do need to select the standard tier, not the basic tier, because we're going to be making use of something called topics. And topics just allow you to segment your service bus effectively and have different topics that you can send messages onto, and that is available from the standard offering upwards. Now you can see here the approximate cost is $10 per 12.5 million operations. So we're going to probably put 1 or 2 operations through it as part of this video, so you can imagine it's really not going to cost that much. So that's all I need to really create. I'm just going to do review and create. Don't need to do anything advanced there. And we'll go off and create that. And that will go and deploy it. And we'll just have to twiddle our thumbs until that happens, because there's a couple of other things we need to do once this namespace has been set up. Okay, cool. So that's the namespace set up. So we'll go to the resource. And here's what I'm talking about here. We've got this concept of queues, which we're not using today, and topics. So I'm going to create a topic. And let's just call it GitHub. Not GitHub, or Hum, as I put there, GitHub. Okay, so imagine the idea that you've got different webhooks coming from different platforms, and this one is for the GitHub webhooks as an example. So we'll create that topic, and then once the topic's created, which it's now created, we then need to create something called a subscription. And so our little subscriber agent that we're going to write will actually make use of this subscription aspect of the service bus. And I'm just going to call it S1. And you can name these things anything you like, anything that makes sense to you. And I'm leaving the defaults for all the other settings. Click create, and that's basically our service bus created. Now, what we will need to get hold of is a connection string to the service bus. So not unlike database, where you need to connect to the database and usually always provide some kind of connection string, the service bus is no different, and we need to get that connection string. So going back to my home page, I will find my namespace, and under settings and under shared access policies, we have this root managed shared access key. And then I'm just going to copy this primary connection string. Now, it goes without saying that this is a sensitive piece of information that you would not share with anybody else, because it means they could actually start using your service bus, and that would obviously incur charges for you. So just be careful how you store this connection string. I've just copied it to clipboard for the moment, and I'll save it off, and we're going to use it in our Azure Function as well as our little subscriber app. So that's that done basically. That's our service bus done. So next up, we're going to create our Azure Function, and we're going to do all of that from within VSCode. And before we even do that, what I need to set up is a folder for a project. So back into my development folder, back into season 7, back into episode 01. Create directory list, and we've got our local webhook endpoint. So I'm going to make a directory, and we're going to call that, Azure Webhook Endpoint, and we'll change into that folder. Directory listing, there's nothing in there, and we'll start VSCode in that folder by typing code-period. Excellent. So we've really just opened a folder. That's all we've done. Now, because we're going to be working with Azure Functions, there's a couple of things that I recommend, or you actually really need to install if you want to do that within VS Code. Let me just make this a bit bigger. The first thing is an extension. So if you come into your extensions, it's this one here, Azure Functions. Okay, so install that. That gives you a couple of other things as well, but most of all, it will give you this Azure icon on the side here. Okay, and it gives you access to your Azure subscription. You do have to log in, of course, which I've already done. And you can see here I actually already have some function apps running, but we're going to create a new one for this project. And then the second thing that I recommend, it's maybe not mandatory, but I really do recommend it, is some Azure Function core tools. And what that allows you to do, amongst other things, is run your Azure function locally before you deploy it. So it means you can test it locally. It's kind of a theme of this video, in fact, being able to run stuff locally without deploying it into a cloud somewhere. So really, really good. Now there's a number of ways you can install it. The way I've usually done it is using npm, the node package manager, to do that, but there's a few other ways you can do it. This article, which I'll link to in the description, kind of goes through the different ways you can do it. So I'll let you choose whichever way you want to do it. I've already done that, so they're already running, and you'll see how that kind of manifests once we actually get our function up and running. So now what we actually want to do is to create our function. So we come down here to this workspace, and you'll see this little Azure function icon. Click on that, and we'll click Create Function. And this will take us through a bit of a wizard. So the first thing it asks us for is the folder location. That's kind of why I created the folder ahead of time. So we're going to create it in there. You can obviously use different languages for your Azure functions. We're obviously going to be using C#. You can choose the .NET runtime, choose .NET 8 isolated, long-term support. And then Azure triggers can be HTTP triggers, they can be Service Bus triggers, all sorts of other things. We're going to create a Service Bus. We're going to create a HTTP trigger that talks to a Service Bus, but it is a HTTP trigger that we want. I'm just going to leave the name, I'm going to leave the namespace as well, and then select function here. And then that will go away and kind of scaffold up a project. Now at this point in time, nothing's touched Azure. We're not deployed anything yet. This is all just running locally. All right, so that's our project finished. The other thing you'll note is that it's already under Git control, so it kind of gets added to a Git repository by default, which is cool. One thing I'll call out is the git ignore file excludes this file here, local.settings.json. You can even see it's grayed out. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is that we're actually going to be putting our connection string into this local settings file, so that if we do publish this to GitHub publicly, we're not going to leak that credential out, okay? It's probably not the most secure way of storing a sensitive credential like that, but for this video it's okay. If you're doing a more productionized solution, you'd maybe want to think about doing something else, maybe user secrets or something like that. Anyway, that's enough for the initial setup. What we'll go on to doing next is starting to actually code up our function. So the first thing we're going to do is add a couple of packages to our project. So I'm going to open the project file and then open a command prompt. So control and backtick, clear the screen. And I'm going to add, as I say, 2 packages. So .NET, add package, and the first one we want is Azure Messaging Service Bus. So hit enter, that should go away, pull that down and add it to a project file. And I just like to keep the project file open because I like to see it actually being added to that. And then clear the screen. Next one we want, do up key is Newtonsoft JSON. And it's added like that. So that's the only packages we need. We can close that down. And then the next thing we're going to do is add a DTO, a data transfer object. And what this is going to do is it's going to contain our deconstructed HTTP message or webhook effectively. So when we get the webhook at a function, we're going to strip out the headers, strip out the body, and we're going to put it into a DTO. And it's that DTO we're going to place onto the service bus. And then when it's received at the other end, we could, do the reverse and extract everything that we need. So new folder, call it DTOs, and then right click that, new file, and we're going to call this webhook event DTO.cs. And we're going to use a record for our DTO rather than the class, simply because records are immutable and they actually really lend themselves really well to the DTO use case. They're also value, you can do value compare against them and stuff, so they're very nice for DTOs. So webhook event DTO, and first thing we're going to add is a string of headers, and the next thing is just going to be a string called body. That's it, super simple, okay, using records rather than classes. Save that off. Next thing we're going to do is add some configuration to our local settings JSON file here. As I may have already mentioned, I think I did just mention it, this local settings JSON file is not under Git control, so we can add stuff here and not hugely secure, but we're confident it's not going to get leaked somewhere public, like a public GitHub repository or anything like that. So the first thing we're going to store is the service bus connection string, and I should have that in my clipboard. So let's just paste that in. And again, don't leak this. It's clearly an important, secure piece of config. And then the next thing we need is the topic name. So we'll just call that service bus topic. And that was GitHub. We don't need to put the subscription in here because the Azure function isn't actually using the subscription part of it. It's just placing messages onto the topic on the service bus. The little agent that we'll write, it actually needs the subscription as well, and we'll obviously put that into config down there when we come on to writing that. But that looks pretty good for now, so I'm going to save that off. So all that's left to do with regards our function is to actually write the code to take the webhook and package it into a DTO and place it onto our service bus. So this is the boilerplate code here. We just have the function, HTTP function. It responds to GET and POST requests, and it provides us with this HTTP request object, and we're going to use that to get the headers and get the body and create our DTO. And yeah, we have a logger here. That's all good. So just at the start of our class, I'm going to create a couple of static strings to contain our config. So first one will be connection string, and we'll make that equal to environment, get environment variable, and then we'll just copy the environment variable key name, which is service bus connection string, and we'll paste that into here like that. So we're getting a warning saying it's possibly going to be null reference, yeah. So I'm going to put a bang in here just to suppress that. We've got something in our config, so I'm fairly confident that's going to be okay. So we'll create another one for the topic. Service bus topic, and do exactly the same thing. Environment, get environment variable, and I'm just going to copy it from here, just in case there's a typo in the name and then we end up with issues when we come to run it. I just want to be super careful, all right? And then the two other things we want to create, I think I've mentioned them already, is a service bus client. So that's an object called service bus client, and we'll just call that client. And also a service bus sender. And we'll call that sender. So moving down into our actual function, come in after the logger output. We'll just leave that as is. It's fine for now. We're going to create our DTO. So what did we call it? Webhook event DTO, and we'll call it Webhook event. And that's just a new Webhook event DTO. And so what we need to pass in there are some headers and the body. Okay, so we're going to use this request object in order to do that. So we're going to make use of the JSON library that we just installed. And I'm going to use the JSON convert method. And I'm going to serialize an object. And what object are we going to serialize? We're going to serialize the headers of the request. So rec headers. Okay, so that's our headers taken care of. And then the next thing we want to pass in is the body. And we're going to use a stream reader for that. So we're going to await on that, asynchronous method. We're going to use a stream reader of the request body. And then we're going to chain on read to end async. And that's really the asynchronous method that we are calling. Now what I might do is just get rid of the sidebar there so you can see all the code, well, pretty much all the code, okay? like so. Now we're now getting a warning or an error really on our actual function, and if we just hover over we can see what that is, saying the return type of async method must be void task or task of type, which is fine. So we need to do that. So let's return a task of type action result. Okay, and that should resolve that warning. So after that line, we want to create our Service Bus client. Well, we already kind of got it up here as a placeholder, but we're going to actually instantiate that to something meaningful. So client equals new Service Bus client, and we're just going to pass in our connection string that we had stored up here also as a static string. Okay, and then our sender, similar sort of thing. We're going to make that equal to the client, just instantiated. We're going to create a sender, and we require the topic name here. What did we call it? I don't think we called it topic name, Service Bus topic. Let's just copy this, like so, to avoid any inconsistencies or errors. Fantastic. The next thing we're going to create is something called a message batch, and as the name would suggest, this is just us placing messages onto the service bus really, or attempting to do that. So we're going to use service bus message batch. Here we go. We'll call it message batch. We'll make that equal to await on the sender, and we're going to call create message batch async, like that. Do a quick check. So if not, message batch, try add message, and we'll set up a new service bus message, and we'll use JSON convert again to serialize our webhook event DTO. JSON convert serialize object webhook event. Then we'll throw an error, okay, as it's not succeeded. Adding that batch has not succeeded, so throw a new exception. I would just say something like the message is too large to fit into the batch, something like that. And then finally, we're going to make use of our sender to actually send the message, okay? So await again on the sender this time, and it's send messages async. Now make sure it's the pluralized version, messages and not message. That's caught me out a few times and caused me all sorts of issues. Cool, and we'll do a quick console write line, and we'll just say batch has been placed onto the message bus topic. Fantastic, and we'll then do a finally sort of clean up of our code, and all we're going to do is await on the sender, and we'll dispose asynchronously of that, and likewise we'll wait on the client. And you can see we're kind of doing this in reverse order in terms of the way we created them, and then we just return our OK object result. Okay, so hopefully that kind of made sense. We are going to get a request in, we create a DTO from it, create a client, create a sender using our config, create this message bus batch, okay, and then we just do a check to make sure that it's not too large to go on to the message bus is basically what this is doing. And then we attempt to send the message batch. So we'll save that off. And then what we'll do is we'll run it up locally, and that actually should work. Even though this is running locally, it should still be able to connect to the service bus and place a message on there. So we'll do that next. So before we run it, I might just bring up the console again and clear the screen and just do a .NET build. Just to make sure there are no issues with the code. I mean, it would show up in VSCode if there were issues, but just want to do this just to make sure. Okay, excellent, build succeeded, that's what we want to see. And then we'll just use the Azure Function core toolset to actually run this locally. So run, start debugging, and that will run it locally. And we'll get an endpoint that we can hit. Excellent, so this is our endpoint here, our local endpoint. So I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to bring Insomnia back onto the screen. And I'm going to create a new call, HTTP request, make it a post request, paste that in here. And I'm going to add a body, JSON body, and we'll just keep it really simple. I'll just put name and then my name, Les, and we'll send that off. And hopefully we should get some kind of successful output. It's looking pretty good. So down here you can see a trigger function was processed by request, a batch has been placed onto the message bus. And we've also received our OK result. So that's looking pretty good. What we might do is come over into Azure. And yeah, we're actually in our message bus at the moment, aren't we? Let's come back home. Let's go back into it this way. There we go. And what we should see is on our topic, we should see some messages on there. There we go, message count 1, active messages 1. Now, there is no receiver at the moment, so that message is just staying in the service bus until it's picked up or until it expires. And when we were setting up the topic, there was an actual field for how long the message will stay on the service bus before it gets deleted, basically. And so this is one of the benefits of service buses. You know, if your endpoints go down, doesn't matter, the service bus is still there and it's queuing your messages. And you know, it's used a lot in distributed systems to make sure those messages get delivered, and it provides that resilience. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. So what we'll do next is we'll actually push our function up to Azure, because again, all just running locally, we don't have the function in Azure yet. We'll do that next, and then we'll write our subscriber. So let's come back into our function in VSCode. Let's just stop the debugger from running. Fantastic. I'm just going to close that and come back over into our Azure extension. And then down in the workspace, we come back to functions and click on that. Let's click deploy to Azure. So you can either select from one of the ones that you've already got there, or you can create a new one. Now you can of course create the function in Azure portal ahead of time and it would appear in this list, or as we're going to do now, we're going to create it in line within VS Code. So I'm going to call it something hopefully unique. So SO7E01 function. I'm hoping that's relatively unique. Excellent. We'll select .NET isolated. And then if you're doing this, if you're following along, pick the region that's closest to you. For me, that's Australia East. It's actually Australia Southeast, but that doesn't matter. And then it will just go away and start deploying the function up to Azure. Now, while I was doing that, you might have noticed when I set the type of function, I chose isolated as opposed to in process. Now, all Azure functions used to be in process, I believe, and then they've recently, or fairly recently, introduced this idea of isolated. And there are differences between the two. And this article, which again I'll link to in the description, goes through the differences. And as you can see here, the isolated model of function code runs in a separate .NET worker process. Okay, in-process model is kind of being deprecated as far as I can understand. So your function runs in the same process as the function host. Okay, and yeah, here we go. It says support will end for the in-process model in November 2026. Okay. So just thought I'd call that out in case you're wondering what the difference there was. So any new functions you're creating, I really suggest you go with the isolated model. Excellent. Now, one important thing you do want to do is upload the settings, okay? And that is the connection string and the topic name. So click on that and you can see it's uploading the settings as well. Okay, really important. If you don't do that, then when the function's running in Azure, it won't have access to the connection string. So that looks pretty successful. So if we come back over to Azure now, we can just check it out. It's there. You might not get that if you're following along, you might need to come into all resources and search for it, but this has appeared for me, which is good. And if we come down to settings and environment variables, I just want to check that the connection string was uploaded. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So there's a Service Bus connection string property, and there's the Service Bus topic. And if you just do show value, you can see it's GitHub. And I'm not even going to bother looking at that one because it's won't remember what that is to compare it, but that looks pretty good. Yeah, okay, excellent. So what we then want to do is actually get the endpoint of this function. And so the way we do that is come back to overview, come down to the HTTP trigger that we just created. And over here, you'll see this button here, get function URL, and that will provide you with the URL to that function that we can call. So I'm going to copy this one here, the default function key, copy it to clipboard, and then I'm going to come back over into Insomnia, pull it back onto screen here, make this a bit bigger, and create a new request, HTTP request. Let me just change it to post. Let me just rename it to Azure call. And we'll paste that in here. And again, we'll add a body. And I'm going to keep it simple, like so. And we'll hit send. That looks pretty good. We've got a 200 OK response. And if we come back to our service bus and look at the topic again, we should see 2 messages on there, hopefully. Indeed we do, 2 messages, which is looking pretty good. And again, that message has nowhere to go until we create our subscriber and consume that message from the bus. So that's looking pretty good now. All we need to do now is write our little subscriber to actually achieve our end goal, which is to pull webhook messages off of Service Bus and get them delivered locally to our machine. And we will actually have to set this up in GitHub as well, just to prove it out end to end. So yeah, we'll do all that next. So yeah, now we're going to create the Service Bus subscriber application. So just bring a command prompt back onto screen, and I'm just going to change into my working directory for the last time. You'll be pleased to hear. So into my development folder, into season 07, and then into episode 01. Quick directory listing. There's our other 2 projects. So this time we want to create a new console app. So .NET new console, and the name of this project is going to be Service Bus Subscriber. So just a very simple console app. Quick directory listing, and then we'll change into that folder and open up VSCode. So code space dot. And as usual, that opens on my other screen. Let's just make that bigger, and I'll just make this a bit bigger so we can see what we're doing. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'll get rid of the welcome screen, is we're going to add some packages to the project just to help us along with various things that we need to do. So that's .NET, add package, and the first one I want to add is Microsoft Extensions Hosting, and that's just going to allow us to work with our configuration layer, because we're going to put the connection string and the topic name and the subscriber name into config. So that's been added. Next one, do upkey, .NET add package is, yeah, indeed Newtonsoft JSON, because we'll be getting the object that's been placed onto the Service Bus, and we're going to want to deserialize that into an object, into a DTO that we can then do stuff with. So that's Newtonsoft JSON. Clear the screen, and then the final one is, of course, the Azure Service Bus messaging stuff. So Azure Messaging Service Bus is the other thing that we need. Fantastic. So we'll clear the screen on that. Don't think we need this anymore. As I've just mentioned, we're going to be deserializing to a DTO. It's exactly the same DTO that we had in our other project. So I'm going to create a folder for that. Probably a bit over the top for something this small, but nonetheless, that's what we're going to do. And then new file, webhook event dto.cs. And it's exactly the same as the DTO we had in the Azure Function project. So I'm sure you won't mind if I just paste it in. You've already seen me type that out. So it's just a record. I've already talked about why we would use records for DTOs. Fantastic. So that brings us on to just finishing off, or actually starting, our main program code. So I'm going to get rid of all this. We don't really need that. And we'll get rid of the command prompt for the moment. So as I said, we want to work with some config. So the way we do that is to use iConfiguration. Call it configuration. And then we're going to make a configuration builder. Now what this does is it just basically allows us to work with our configuration layer, as the name would suggest, and read in things from like app settings JSON and user secrets and stuff like that. So not binder, builder is what we want. So let's first of all set the base path. So that's where do we start looking for config files. So we're going to set it to directory and get current directory. Like that. Next we're going to add, and this is where you add your sources of config. So we're going to add a JSON file, and I'm just going to add app settings JSON. Now, of course, you could add other ones if you wanted, like the development settings JSON and stuff like that. I'm going to set it to optional true because it may not exist. That should be a colon, not a double quote. And then we'll use this reload on change true as well, so we'll reread it in if we're reloading. Going to then do add user secrets, because I'm going to use user secrets for certainly the connection string. And that's going to be a type of program.assembly. It too is optional. You may not have it. True. And then all we need to do after that is build. Okay, so that's just bringing in two of many possible configuration sources. So with that, let's just add an app settings JSON file as well. So new file, app settings.json. Make sure it's called JSON, not JSON. Okay, and into this, I'm going to put our topic name and our subscription name, because I guess they could be considered sensitive bits of information, but I think they're okay to put in just a config file. So we'll call it service bus topic name, and that was of course GitHub, and we will also put in our subscription bus subscription name to keep it consistent, and that was S1. Okay, so what should happen then when this program starts, because we've included this configuration builder, it should read in any settings and app settings JSON, so we now have access to these settings here. I want to put the connection string to the service bus in user secrets though, because I don't really want that sensitive information in a file. So actually we will come back to csproj, because what I'm going to do is initialize user secrets, and the way we do that is .NET user secrets init. And what that does, it basically just adds this tag set here with a GUID. And really all that does is that when we create user secrets, it saves user secrets off to a location where this is the folder name. Now you can rename this, you can prepend it with something that's a bit more meaningful, but I'm just leaving it as that for now. So the way we set user secrets, let me just clear the screen, it's .NET user secrets set, and then you give the name of your key. So I'm going to call this service bus connection string, space, double quotes, and then paste in your value, whatever you want that to be. And in this case, I want that to be our connection string. Okay, so that's successfully saved that away. So basically we can just reference this now from within config, okay, in the same way that we could reference these things here. It's exactly the same. The configuration object we have here now gives us access to all three of those things, irrespective of where they come from. So it's really, I really like the .NET configuration stuff. I think it's really well done, to be honest with you. It's one of my favorite things about it. All right, cool. So that's us set up our config. Now let's actually get on to writing the main part of our code. So I'm actually going to set up some string values for our configuration settings. So let's do one called connection string, and we'll make that equal to our configuration object, double quotes, and then just whatever we decided to call that. And I have cleared the screen. Let me just do an up key just to make sure that I copy it exactly correctly, like that. Okay, so we'll read in that value like such, semicolon, and we'll also put a bang in there just to say it's not going to be null. Second string is going to be topic name. I'm just going to copy this. I think I'll be a bit copying now. To be honest with you, it's probably not any quicker than just typing it. And we'll come into our app settings JSON, pull out our topic name like that, paste it in here, like so, and then finally string subscription name, and we'll make that equal to configuration. It is actually quicker typing it. There you go. And I will just pull out the, not there, here, subscription name. Cool. Now what I might just do, just to test, I'm going to do a console log or console write line, and I'm just going to write out the connection string. I just want to make sure that's getting picked up because, you know, occasionally things can go awry, and if there's double quotes in the connection string, it can, you know, not render properly and all that stuff. So let's just run that up now. I just want to make sure that prints to screen. So it's all saved off. Let's do .NET run. And we should just get the connection string printed to screen if everything's kind of wired up correctly. Excellent, it's printed out okay. So that's basically pulled out our connection string from our user secrets, which by the way is just a file, a JSON file I think it is, on our file system. Okay, so that's it. Okay, cool. So that's all good. I'll take this line out. I just wanted to put that in just to make sure everything is working as it should be. So let's get rid of this. So the next thing we're going to set up is a Service Bus client, kind of like we did before inside the Azure Function. Like that, and we'll just call that client like we did before. And we're also going to set up a Service Bus processor this time. So you remember last time we set up a sender, this time we're setting up a processor. Now the processor basically allows us to subscribe, in short, to Service Bus events. That's really all it's allowing us to do. I say all it's allowing us to do. It's obviously totally critical, but yeah, so it's an important thing. This is just saying it's not being used, but it will be used in just a second, so no problem with that. So in fact, let's define our client, and we'll just say equals new Service Bus client, and we're just going to pass in our connection string. Okay, and we've validated that that's working okay, so our client should be okay. Just remove this extra white space. And then we'll set up our processor and make that equal to our client. Create processor off of our client, and we set the topic name, which again we've set as part of our config. The subscription name, and then new Service Bus processor options. Excellent, so save that off. Now what we're going to do, well, we're not doing it next, but what we do need to do is basically use this processor to subscribe to Service Bus events, and we're going to require some event handlers. So I'm going to write the event handlers first, and then when we come to subscribe to them, they're already there. So let's just make a bit of a note, and we'll just say handle received messages. And we'll call this, we'll make it async. Let's try that again. And returns a task, and we'll call this message handler. And we'll expect a process message event args, and we'll call those args. Okay, so the idea is we get a new message, that's the event arguments that are going to get passed in to our event handler, and then we do something with it. So I'm going to create a string, and I'm just going to call it body, and we'll make that equal to args message body to string. Now, just be warned, when we are talking about a body in this context, we're not talking about the HTTP request body and headers. This is the body of the message bus message, okay? It's that body, not the body of the HTTP request. We will further deconstruct this body into headers and HTTP body. So maybe this was not the best name to use, but the reason I'm using it is because that's actually what it's called here in reference to our message, okay? Is our message body, okay? But just wanted to call that out. It's not the same thing. And then we're going to create a DTO to contain our, basically our body, I guess. So say webhook event DTO, not dot, DTO, equals, this is where we use JSON convert, and we're going to deserialize an object of what type? Of webhook event DTO. And what are we deserializing? We're just deserializing the body, okay? Save that off. So coming back to our DTO, just to refresh, we are going to deserialize to this, and that contains a header and a body, okay? Hopefully that's not too confusing. And then that's us really got our webhook event down to our local machine. I'm not going to do anything else other than just write those values to the screen. That was the whole point of today. Just get that stuff down here. Now you could write it to a database. You could actually call the other little endpoint that we'd written, make a HTTP request to that. I think that's extra detail that's beyond this video. I just wanted to get the message to my machine so I can see what it is. So mission accomplished from my perspective. You may disagree, but hopefully it's given you enough to go on and extend it if you actually want to do that. So let's just write those values out to screen and we'll kind of not call it a day, we've still got stuff to finish off. Let's just do string interpolation. So we'll do a little line and we'll just say headers are WHE DTO headers, and then put a bang in here, just say it's not going to be empty, and we'll say body is WHE DTO body. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, that's cool. We're just reading that out, writing that out, and then finally on our message bus, what we have to actually do is acknowledge that we've received the message. So we'll say complete message async, and we'll just say args message like that. Okay, so that's basically saying, yeah, we've got it, and that will take the message off of the service bus. It won't persist there any longer. Okay, so that's our first message handler. Okay, it's just complaining because it's not being used. That's okay, it will be used in a minute. And then we'll do another message handler for errors, just in case we get any. Hopefully not. And the message or the event args are going to be process error event args, call that args. Excellent. And then we will do a console write line. And we'll just write out those errors to string. Awesome. And then we'll just return task completed. Okay, cool. So we'll come back up here now and we'll actually wire up our processor and we'll make use of these event handlers here. I'm going to put it in a try catch block. And this what I'm going to do is a processor, process message async, and then we're going to use plus equals and then our message handler. That's us effectively subscribing to our message handler. Okay, so that's us wiring up that one event. And then we'll also wire up our error event handler, so process error async plus equals, and that was called error handler. Let's get rid of all those warnings. Cool. And then what we need to do is we actually need to start a processor. So we've just subscribed to those events, so we're going to start processing async. That kicks things off. And what I might do is do a console write line just to say we've started or we're listening. We'll say listening to message bus, service bus more correctly. And then we're just going to want it to sit there and listen. So what we're going to do is we're going to do we'll actually say something else. We'll say console write line. And we'll say press any key to end processing. And then we'll just do a console read key like that. So that's just going to wait, okay, and allow events to trickle through. And obviously if we hit a key, then we'll just stop the listener. So if a key is hit, then we'll go on to this line here and we'll just stop our processor. But I'll write out a message to the screen, console write line. Let's see. Attempting to stop receiver. I before E, except after C. That's a little rhyme I always remember from school. And then we'll just stop our processor like that. So it's stop processing async, we want to call. And then do you know what, I'm going to copy this and done with typing console write line, and we'll just say stopped. Okay, and then we'll do a bit of a clear up. So we'll use a finally, and then there we'll do a wait processor, dispose async, and then we'll wait on our client, I guess, yeah. And we'll do the same thing, dispose async. Let's just double check. Oh, right. Okay, that could get a bit tricky. Look what I've done here. So I've got these round the wrong way. So this should be start, and this should be stop. So let me just reiterate that again. We're subscribing to the message handler events. We want to start processing, and then if you hit a key, we want to stop processing, and then finally we'll dispose of everything. Okay, cool. So let's just do a build. .NET build, that could have gone south. All right, that's okay. Let's just come back to the service bus, and you'll remember from last time we had two messages that were active on the message bus, service bus. So theoretically, assuming I've not made any other mistakes that I've not spotted, we do a .NET run. There we go. That's pulled down our two messages from the service bus. Okay, excellent. And we'll leave that running for the moment. If we come back on to the service bus, we should see these messages drain out basically. So let's go back to here. You can see we've actually got a subscription count now, which is good. Someone's subscribed in. And yeah, we have no active messages on the service bus. Excellent. So what we might then do, just to test it all end to end, is to come back over to Insomnia. Let me just jiggle a few things around here. Actually, let's close this. Let's kill it. Let's just clear the screen, make it easier to read. We'll rerun it. It'll be easier to see if events come in. And then we'll call our Azure function using Insomnia again. Resize this. I've got Insomnia probably magnified too big. Anyway, you'll remember this is no, it's not. This is that is the one. This is our Azure function, and we're just passing over a simple body. If we send that, should go onto the, there we go, very quick. As you can see, that went onto the service bus, and then the subscribers pulled it down. So our events are coming down really quite quickly. And then just to round it out end to end, what we'll do is I'm going to copy this endpoint like that, and then I'm going to come back over to GitHub, which again was really the whole point. Again, let me just stop this. I mean, we'll probably see it jump in, but I just want to kind of make it a bit easier for everybody to see. And we're back in our repository, back into settings, into webhooks. Let's delete this one, or Ngrok one. Yeah, delete the webhook. You need to authenticate, great. I do like the added sort of two-factor authentication. It makes me feel comfortable, but it can be annoying when you're making a video, for sure. So, okay, that's cool, and we've deleted our webhooks. Let's add a webhook. And I'm going to paste in our Azure endpoint, like so, and we'll just send everything, and we'll add webhook, and we should get an event down here. There we go, for the registration event, and you can see all that stuff there, and we can then do whatever we need to do with that. So with that, that brings us to the end of our video. We've explored two ways that you can get webhooks from a remote source system down to your local machine. Thanks for watching, really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, maybe think about subscribing. If not, maybe just even like the video, whatever. I just appreciate you watching this far. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.